Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our seminar this evening, coming from Doughty Street Chambers. My name's Jamie Burton. I'm head of the Community Care and Health team at Doughty Street. Really delighted to be presenting this, or chairing, I should say, this seminar for you this evening. It promises to be really interesting, reflective, and an opportunity for us all to have a big think, really, about the future, in particular of adult social care. I've got three fantastic speakers who I'll introduce in due course in a moment. But just before doing so, just to sort of explain a bit about why we're having this seminar at the moment. Many of you will, of course, know that Theresa May's government promised for some time that we would have a green paper or perhaps a white paper building on the reforms introduced by the Care Act 2014, the much heralded Care Act 2014, which, as most of you will know, introduced some very important principles around well-being and around personalisation in particular. Theresa May, however, was charged with looking at the question of how all of this would be paid for, and in particular, how people would make contributions towards their own adult social care. And to some extent, the debate about adult social care since then has been dominated by money, either about the ways in which people will be required to pay for their care, or indeed about how the state will raise the money to pay for the care system. The Labour Party has recently suggested that the answer would be to have some kind of national care service, an equivalent to the National Health Service. And there are other organisations, charities and NGOs who've made a contribution to this lively debate. None more so, though, than Social Care Futures, a really inspiring partnership of activists, lawyers and others working in this area. And so I'm really delighted to be able to say that we have two speakers who've been involved in that process. First of all, we've got Neil Crawford, who's going to speak first. Neil is the co-convener of Social Care Future. He describes it as a movement pursuing a future in which we're all able to live in the place we call home, be with the people and things that we love, doing what matters to us in communities where we all look out for one another. Neil is also an independent consultant leading research, policy and strategy and communications work around social change. His primary focus is and has been for a very long time on the rights of disabled people, and he's currently leading research into the impact of COVID-19 on disabled people across Europe. Next, we're going to hear from Julie Stansfield. Julie Stansfield is a founder member and chief executive of In Control Partnerships. In Control instigated the self-directed support and personalisation agenda in health and social care policy and practice. This enabled people with disabilities and their families to be more in control of their health and social care provision. Julie has over 30 years experience in the health and social care sectors and is rooted in her passion for inclusion and enabling people to have the support they need to lead an ordinary life. She's also one of the conveners of Social Care Future. We also have, the last speaker will be Mitch Wolfe. Mitch is a solicitor at Scott Moncrief, who specialises in human rights law and in particular the rights of children and people with disabilities. He's extensive community care and public law experience. He's been around the block several times, has brought numerous high profile challenges and day-to-day challenges in support of people who have encountered the care system in one way or the other, and is a leading authority really on the interaction between the Human Rights Act and social care. So as I said, the aim of today's session really is to dig down into some of the sort of principles and ethos behind the Care Act and behind adult social care more generally, and to try for once to take a slightly more optimistic or sort of blue sky view or approach to the problem, rather than just getting bogged down in what can sometimes be a difficult and potentially quite depressing area because, as I've said, of the amount of controversy around money. But of course, it's about a lot more than just money. So having said all of that, if I can introduce our first speaker, Neil Crawford.
Unmute to myself, it's always a good start. I'm just going to put my slides up, just bear with me. So Jamie's, thanks for inviting us to talk tonight and to have this space to talk about where we are now, but more importantly, the future and how we get there. Jamie's already outlined what Social Care Future is, but just to reiterate, we very much see ourselves as a movement for social change. we're made up of a real diverse range of people who draw on the care and support system themselves, for themselves or their loved ones, people who are involved in the provision of care, people who are involved in researching it, people who are involved in litigating around it. It's a real broad range of people, but the thing that brings us together is a shared vision of the future, and it's a future that is actually quite ordinary in its expectations, but extraordinary in the fact that it's some way from what many people currently experience, articulated in the headline vision that Jamie set out there, that we all really want to live in the place we call home, be with the people and things that we love, doing what matters to us in communities where we look out for one another. And as simple as that vision sounds, we have a lot of work to make sure that most people can realise it in practice. Now, that vision is rooted in law already, or in various elements of law. I guess one of the most key things that are key cornerstones is Article 19 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on living independently and being included in the community. Our vision is very much about people having choice and control over their support and over their own life and being able to participate fully. Similarly, it's rooted in Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the right to private and family life. In Section 149 of the Equality Act 2010, the public sector equality duty. Jamie's mentioned the Care Act 2014, including the well-being principles, which very much infuse our vision and our idea of how social care should work, and also the Mental Capacity Act 2005. I'm not going to get into the detail of those things. My colleagues will do as we move along. But there are legal foundations to the vision that we're articulating and pursuing. But the truth is there is a large gap, as I've already said, between that vision and where we are now. Not just in terms of practice, but in terms of both philosophy and in terms of my particular interest here, discourse, how we are actually talking about social care and what it is and what it does. So our approach is very much about everybody having a life and being supported to have a life. The current public story of social care tends to depict it as just keeping people alive. And in practice, much of what people receive on the ground does little more than that, than offer them life and limb support with washing, feeding and getting dressed, for example. We see social care as a vehicle. It's the means to the end of having the life that one would want to live. The current public story centres on the idea of social care as a destination or a place. And that's a theme that's really solidified over the last year, given much of the focus has been on the situation in residential care homes. Our approach sees social care as being about caring about and supporting each other, not just care and support through formal services, but through informal support from networks, from friends, from neighbours and so on. The current public story centres almost entirely on looking after our most vulnerable citizens. We see it as about nurturing these relationships and connections that are important to all of us. The current public story is very much on a sector or industry delivering a service. We see it as people with gifts and potential and their opportunity to contribute that gifts and that potential to the wider community. The public story very much centres on the idea of people with needs. We think great care and support has growing value in our society, a society that's undergoing demographic change. The current public story very much centres on the idea of the growing cost of this life and limb support, with metaphors such as the demographic time bomb and the silver tsunami. We talk about an investment of resources to improve all our lives. The public story is about spending and containing spending in particular. We see it as something where everybody has a role to play. Much for the public narrative, it sees it as only central government able to fix things. And we see this as an opportunity. The current public story very much characterises it as a broken system in crisis. So this is the kind of contrasting narratives and what we're trying to change, but it's also what we're trying to change in practice through a number of means. The strategy that we're employing to bridge the gap includes a new narrative. In the coming weeks, we're about to publish the narrative that we're putting forward, which we've spent several months testing with the public and developing and refining. Very much about focusing on efficacy, on solutions. So since the beginning in 2018, we've put a lot of the accent on showing how this idea can work in practice. And there are plenty of ideas of good practice out there. Unfortunately, they tend to be on the margins rather than the mainstream of practice. So we also have spent a lot of time looking at how we can ensure most local authorities, or more local authorities rather, commission innovative practice and make sure it becomes more commonplace. We've been involved in challenging the rhetoric reality gap, including using the law, and both Julie and Mitch are going to talk about that next. And increasingly, we're focusing on how we turn our nascent movement into a much broader, more inclusive movement for change. And we're working with a group at the minute who have previously worked with the Grenfell families to assist us in thinking that through. So that's just a quick introduction. I'll be happy to answer any more questions about social care future as we go along. But we're now going to kind of move on to talk about the law in a bit more detail.
Thanks very much, Neil. Very interesting and very good to start off by just talking about the broad narratives and how language itself starts to sort of direct our thinking in ways that aren't always necessarily helpful. And thanks very much for that, Neil. And next we're going to hear from Julie, and in particular about how to close the gap, Julie. Fascinated to understand how we might go about doing that. So over to Julie, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Screen all right there, yeah? So one of the things that we started doing as part of Social Care Futures was setting up this Be Human movement. And what sort of instigated that was that a lot of the problems that we were finding in social care weren't all about the money. A lot of it was about attitude. You know, whether people were kind, how people behaved, whether or not they actually followed the law or were in breach of the law. Trust come up an awful lot about statutory services, trusting people to get on with spending direct payments from social services, transparency, how transparent people were, how present they was, and I'll show you as we go through this register around communication issues, people being honest, and above all being human. So one of the things that we started to do is we started to record the experiences of health and social care during COVID-19, pandemic and beyond. We knew we wanted it to go beyond this. And we also really had a good indication that what would come through there weren't just what was happening around COVID. There were things that was happening pre-COVID, but actually the pandemic has started to highlight that. So we wanted to identify what's going well and not so well, but we also, where appropriate and practical, wanted to intervene and help. So we didn't want this just to be a survey about people's experiences that they could write. We actually wanted to get a bit deeper and understand where those problems were arising, why, and what might help in those situations. So we set off doing this. We had the help of Professor Chris Hatton and Mitch Wolfe, who you'll hear from next, to help us to try and figure out what are the sorts of things we want to hear about and survey, but then also to start doing digging a bit deeper around people's direct experiences. And what we found was this was some of the issues that came off. There were some positive experiences. There was suddenly some authorities that changed from command and control to being very, very human, offering people massive practical support. And some people reported that it was the first time ever in 20 years of using social services that somebody actually phoned them up and asked them how they were. Genuinely just asked how they were. So there were some positive things, but then there were an awful lot of issues that were coming up, things like poor communication, just not getting a response. When people were trying to contact somebody, they just weren't getting a response back. And I'd say that probably happened pre-COVID. There were very specific services that stopped during COVID, but there were also cuts to support as well from people, which again, had been happening pre-COVID, but suddenly there were a good reason or our reason to start cutting support. Services not providing reasonable adjustments and flexibility was a big highlight in the report. Care homes, obviously, that's been all over the news, so we know about that. Services preventing people from meeting family or contacting family for a variety of reasons. And then there were some fairly sort of obvious early pandemic ones, like helping to get food shopping and prescriptions. But some of the others, like no assessment and backup planning, again, I would say some of that was even happening pre-COVID as well. So when we dug down into some of them issues, some of them had happened pre-COVID, but they never had a way of reporting them before. For direct payments in particular, so this is cash in lieu of services, the biggest issues around was flexibility, accessing equipment, employment law around personal assistance. Who's in control of that? Do the authority do that, or do I do it as an employer if I'm somebody using a direct payment? The contact was really big from both council and CCGs, and then there was stuff that's still coming through very, very around testing, treatment and vaccination. So when people actually asked for the assistance, we started to try and categorise how we were offering assistance to people. And this is like the 6 linear ways that we've been doing that. So the first one was just helping people to get on and do it themselves. So we're, you know, as Jamie said, we're a big believer in self-directed support and people sort of self-directing, being in control. There's a clue in the title. So we wanted people to feel that control and be able to do it themselves. So we initially started to offer some very specific information and advice and different information and advice. So yes, there was the government guidance, but we also collected information and advice from other people. So people who'd already done some plans or already sort of thought about contingency planning. We help people to share that with each other so that people then could start helping each other. And we also run a series of webinars. Let's talk about webinars to help people to talk through some of the issues and help people to get on and find out things themselves during this time. And then the second one was sort of supported to do it yourself. So this was where people might know they need something, but have no idea where to get that information from. So as Neil went through that legislation and where social care futures were linked to, the majority of families and individuals that I support probably might know the Care Act out of those, but wouldn't necessarily know any of the other pieces of legislation. So there's something that, you know, people would be able to do it themselves if that was highlighted to them. So the sort of supported was more right signposted, mention this piece of legislation, or, you know, sort of highlighting a paragraph and saying, this is what you need to be saying. So again, it was just giving people that little bit of guidance, advice and support for them to then be able to carry on and do it themselves. And then this tactical advice. So this is where people were wanting to help make a persuasive case effectively to either the council or the CCG in order to get the best outcomes for themselves or their loved ones. And that could include things like wording or structuring an email to the local authority, but also making effective use of the guidance. You know, so some of that could be, you know, the way that they email somebody or listening to how different people do it. So a lot of this was around people asserting themselves and say, yes, actually, I do have the right to use my direct payments flexibly during this time. Therefore, I'm going to write and say that. I'm going to use my direct payment in this way. And sometimes it's the wording of the email that makes the difference and helping people just tactically to word that in a way that would be more accepted and less chance of it getting into dispute. And then there's informal sort of consolidation or mediation. And this is where it's tactical advice again, but it might be that I emailed on somebody's behalf informally and said, such a body wants this, can we do this? And I'd sort of intervene and just help to get a win-win between public services and the individual to avoid a dispute. And then we went on then to more formal consolidation. And usually this was where people were already in dispute. So people were already in dispute with the public service. They felt that they weren't getting what they needed, or that the authority weren't following the law, or that the authority weren't following the guidance that was there. And I was then there working as a mediation with some other partners to sort of work in between that and sort of seeing both sides of the story. And some of that's really around, it's probably less about formal mediation and more about people skills and seeing both sides of the story and helping people get to a win-win. And then of course, this formal complaint and legal challenge. So there's some where people have clearly in a situation where there's no other option really but to get somebody like Mitch involved and go, help, this is clearly in breach of the law and people need some formal legal advocacy in this situation. The reason I've gone through them in that way is because people tend to go from 1, 2 of that straight through to 6. And the ones in the middle, that sort of tactical advice, that informal mediation or representation, it's not advocacy. It's somebody who sort of represents and understands both the system from the family point of view and from the local authority or the CCG point of view, and understands the local practice and policy as well as the law. And that's more often than not known or available to people. So I think there's a real gap there about people just not knowing or it not being available to people, and they end up then going straight from, if I can't do it myself, I need to find a solicitor like Mitch to represent me. And sometimes the solicitor would say, there's no breach of the law here. This is about attitude, this is about miscommunication, this might be about a local policy that's actually nothing to do with anything directly in the Care Act. So what can we do? What are we trying to do? So, you know, along with sort of social care futures and some of our Be Human partners, I guess what we're trying to do is highlight nationally what needs to change. So we're doing an awful lot of that through Social Care Future about what needs to change and what the future might look like. We're also trying to use the opportunity to say things like, during COVID, there's been an awful lot around direct payment flexibility and the adaptation of process. Can that carry on post COVID-19? So can we use that as an opportunity to say, yeah, we know it were happening before, but actually it's really highlighted it now, but we need this to carry on afterwards. We want to try and identify a range of national level of sort of best value forms of support where people really can get that win-win-win on between people, professionals and the actual systems, and sort of getting some real Be Human principles out there. You know, how can we be more transparent? How can we make things simpler, I guess, for people to understand exactly what the different processes are. I often talk to people in the NHS and they're saying, even I work in the NHS and I struggle to understand the system. So it's really difficult then for the general public to understand the system. And we want to contribute to, obviously, the National Health and Social Care policy around the infrastructure needed to really build some personal power for people. And we'll be setting that out in the next few weeks as our Be Human report becomes published. And then we want to consider the establishment of some sort of, and I don't know whether this is the right terminology, but like a national mediation function. And the nearest I can describe it is similar to what ACAS does between an employer and an employee. They try and get the win-win between those two groups. I think we need the same for social care or people who have long-term healthcare. We need something in between statutory commissioners and people who are receiving them in order to try and get some really good productive solutions to sometimes really complex and often conflictual situations that never really needed to get into that level of dispute if they'd have been picked up earlier on. And above all of that, get people more access to the law and what people's rights are. You know, so some people just don't know what their rights are. You know, you find families and you find some situations where they're in clear breach of the law, but the family didn't know what the law was around that or what their rights were. So there's something about people being able to know the rights, but then help to actualise their rights as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. That was fascinating. I mean, it really does raise the question, doesn't it? How much sort of inefficiency there is in the system through people just not knowing the law and then not getting the help they need to try and achieve those win-wins. And you know, I suppose that goes back to what Neil was saying about it's not really all about money. Indeed, even when it comes to the disputes, it's not always about money, but it's about having cleverer and more sensitive ways of trying to work through problems. But at the same time, ensuring people know their rights. You know, and access to justice, I think, has been one of the prevailing themes that has been sort of topical in the context of adult social care for some time. And one does wonder whether or not, in relation to the Care Act, one of the reasons why there's this big gap between the rhetoric and reality is because just not enough people are being able to get that basic advice in their hands early on, so that they're empowered to then enter into proper discussions with the local authority. And of course, the Act is littered with these duties that require local authorities to try and agree things with the adults receiving the care and support or their carers. But what prospect is there of beneficial agreements if people don't actually know their rights in the first place? Thanks very much, Julie. Fascinating. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions both for Julie and Neil, and in due course, Mitch. I should have said this before, but if you wouldn't mind putting your questions in the Q&A section, we will have, of course, an opportunity for questions from the audience after Mitch has finished his talk. And then you feel free to ask questions of any of the speakers, or indeed all of them. Right, over to you, Mitch. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed for having me. And I mean, I just want to say I fully endorse what Neil and Julie have said about the future and what they've been expressing. But in looking at this, I did want to highlight that adult social care has widespread systemic failings at the moment that are both structural and financial. And this is not just a COVID problem. This has been going on for a great many years. Now, I don't think any of that is controversial. When Boris Johnson took his turn to bound up to the steps of Downing Street in July 2019, one of the things he said is, we will fix the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan we have prepared to give every older person the dignity and security they deserve. Now, one immediate concern, of course, is that he was talking about every older person. The social care crisis goes beyond just the elderly and the older population, although that is a huge issue. And even when mired with COVID and back in July 2020 or June 2020, he still said, we won't wait to fix the problem of social care that every government has flunked for the last 30 years. So given that this topic was about the rhetoric and the reality, I thought I would throw in some of the rhetoric because it's quite important. And while I think it's right to be critical of initiatives over the last 30 years that have often missed the mark or sidestepped the important issues, and there have been a great many of them, and one notable exception I would highlight is the Care Act 2014, which we refer to, which I think is a really positive piece of legislation and helpful. But what I did want to look at, having just talked about the rhetoric, was to look at the reality. And the reality is uncomfortable because, as I say, the problems with resources have been around in social care for a long time. A big landmark case in 1997, a case called Ex parte Barry, dealt with resources in social care and said that councils could take their resources into consideration. Now, that meant that people weren't getting services have not been getting services for a long time. Of course, that was exacerbated with the global financial crisis that hit around 2007-8. And then, of course, the decade of austerity that followed that has really placed local authorities in an incredibly difficult financial situation as governments try to reduce their budget deficit. And then, of course, we have the COVID crisis that has not helped matters. But the funding gap created by cuts is hugely important, and it's estimated to be that the funding gap will be about 2.6 billion in the year 2020 to 2021. And we've also got a situation where councils are cutting services, selling off land, reducing space for day centres and community activities. All of these problems come into the mix. And of course, it's not just a crisis of local authorities. Unlike the NHS, which is the majority of carers under the social care system work for private companies or are self-employed, and they face a number of challenges, from the financial issues of very low pay, unrealistic timescales with which to carry out the work that they have to do, the lack of specialist training to deal with vulnerable people with complex needs, meaning that they're not given the chance, carers aren't being given the chance to recognise and work with the needs that they're having to deal with. A Unison survey back in 2017 found that over 3/4 of carers did not feel they had enough time to provide people with dignified care. Now, that's not a situation that's going to have improved. And it's probably unsurprising, especially when you bring into the mix the 0-hour contracts that a lot of carers have who work for private companies, and the fact that those who are experienced carers and carers with qualifications often find that they're receiving minimum pay and have no real progression, even though despite their qualifications or their experience. All of that means that people will not stay in the care sector, and it's estimated that this was pre-COVID, that there's a workforce shortage of about 122,000 people in the sector, which of course may well be adversely affected by the new points-based immigration scheme, which has an annual wage threshold which is higher than most social care workers will have. You've also got it within the mix because so much of social care is provided through care providers, care homes that are closing, and care providers who are handing back contracts because they're finding they don't have the staffing to comply with those contracts, or just can't make it work financially. And as I say, these are cross-generational issues. So they go from, we have issues being highlighted all the time from young people with learning difficulties who are being placed in acute treatment units, which are totally unsuitable for them, to people being left without access to the community, left isolated and lonely, to elderly people. And Age UK highlighted a year or two ago that around 1.4 million, there are about 1.4 million cases of, or they estimate about 1.4 million cases of people over the age of 65 with unmet care needs. So you've then got within that mix difficulties within charging for services and the pressure being put onto informal carers. The impact is huge, of course, in all these factors. One is, of course, that councils and social workers are not doing their job properly. They are breaking the law. You have a difficult situation where this obviously breaks down, trust can break down, and a problem where decent social workers will leave social work because they become totally disaffected with their situation. We also have an increasing problem of, in effect, a postcode lottery that has developed as some services, there are some areas where services are incredibly limited, particularly within access to the community, and that means that two people with essentially the same needs can get very different responses from their local authority, depending on where they live up and down the country. And of course, the impact of significant impact of this is that disabled people are suffering harm, and their families, of course, are suffering an impact as well. And the further problem with these systemic failings is that it leads within public bodies to a sort of a silo thinking, a situation where they thinking purely about their problems and not the wider issues. And this creates something which has been around for a long while, I think, which I've termed, helpfully or otherwise, as institutional selfishness. And that's a situation where, for instance, social care, by not providing people with services, thinks that they are saving money. But in fact, what is happening is they are increasingly risking the likelihood that those people not receiving services will end up in the mental health care system or coming within the healthcare system in one way or another through accident or an emergency or however. And so the saving that the local authority thinks it, or social services thinks it's making, is actually not a saving for the taxpayer as a whole. It's actually, if you don't deal with these problems at an early stage, the likelihood is that the problems become far more costly down the line. And this doesn't just impact on the way social care deals with issues that turn into healthcare issues. We regularly see problems where local authorities, social care, will make a decision that they know is actually going to be more costly for another part of the local authority, for instance, the housing authorities. And yet these narrow decisions are being made, which mean that that social care pot is not being spent, but what you're having is greater cost and greater inefficiency to the taxpayers, because it's just costing more in the end to provide services, and of course doing a lot more harm to people in the interim. But there are reasons for hope, and what Neil and what Julie have talked about are hugely important reasons for hope. But there are also reasons for hope because, as has been highlighted, the Care Act is a hugely important piece of legislation. It did away with, prior to the Care Act, there was some really complex, rather unhelpful piecemeal legislation that had built on, sometimes very imperfectly, built on legislation built on other legislation. It didn't fit together well. It didn't really do the job. But the Care Act has highlighted the importance of well-being duties and the importance of participation and choice and control. And these are really important issues that need to be given their dues and be allowed to be pursued. We also, and Neil referred to Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is about the right to live independently and be included in the community. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which the UK has signed up to, but it hasn't yet incorporated into UK law, is really important because it includes, it talks about the importance of, there are provisions like Article 9 that talk about enabling people to participate in the community and not being overlooked in the community. It provides a broader basis for which a more meaningful service can exist. So very briefly, what are the actions that are needed? Well, there are no quick fixes. We know that. Action number one is holding councils and public bodies to account through judicial review challenges, not feeling in a situation where councils are in a difficult situation, so the fact that they haven't complied with their legal duties is in any way acceptable. in 2019 in a case called CP and North East Lincolnshire Council that went to the Court of Appeal, Lord Justice Haddon Cave said, "A breach of statutory duty is a breach of statutory duty. It is by definition unlawful conduct. Unlawful conduct by a public body cannot merely be discounted or ignored." So that's coming from the Court of Appeal, so it's important authority, and I think that's worth bearing in mind. There's greater importance on community action, and as well as looking at what Neil and Julie have been talking about, I think it's important that people don't suffer alone and don't feel isolated. It is community action that can really force change. And one good example of this, quite recently in the end of December, we had a decision on charging in a case called SH and Norfolk County Council. And this involved a challenge to the charging policy of the council, which was found to be a breach of the Human Rights Act because it was in essence discriminatory. Now, one of the important things about this, the way this case developed, was that it developed through people within the community who, right at the start, when the policy was developed a couple of years before, had been unhappy with the consequences and started talking to the council about or raising their concerns. And they increasingly became a body, an increasing group of people with a voice, highlighting to the council that the charging regime was actually really disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable in the community. And even though the council said that their policy, they accepted it was discriminatory, they said it was unintentional, the people in Norfolk who fought this for 2 years were standing up, shouting and calling this out as a problem, until it got to the court where the High Court decided, yes, this was unlawful. But it's that sort of dogged community spirit and action, this idea that people shouldn't suffer in isolation, particularly disabled people shouldn't suffer in isolation, which I think is a really important message to get out there. And it leads to the fact, I mean, we recently had the 25th anniversary of the Disability Discrimination Act, which is now part of the Equality Act 2010. But one of the important things that did was raise the importance of reasonable adjustments when you're dealing with disability discrimination. Public bodies have to put in place reasonable adjustments to ensure that disabled people can in practice access work and access their community. They did that. That was achieved through protest by the disability community, making sure in the end that they got their voice heard. So there is also, I'd just like to throw in 2 quick points because I appreciate I'm going over my time, but there's the effective integration of health and social care that is really important to this issue. I know we have integrated care systems setting up, but I think this is going to be an important issue to deal with, how we get a joined up service, and a joined up service that firstly listens to social care and secondly deals with the funding issues in a way where the pot is actually that we get rid of the institutional selfishness that has been in place. The other issue is that a lot of these issues that we're talking about are economic and social, refer to in essence economic and social rights. And I think it's important at a time when we're talking about a British Bill of Rights, we're talking about a lot of the focus is on the civil and political rights contained in the European Convention on Human Rights. There are economic and social rights that are also important. And I think there has to be a point at some point, if we are going to really get into these issues, that we start debating the importance of economic and social rights so that we have so that everyone can be clear about where we stand on these issues as a nation. But social care to develop, it certainly needs to become broader. people need to be bolder, and we need to look for sustainable rather than reactive approaches that are going to help us in the long term. So I'm sorry that a lot of that was not was probably a bit more depressing than it should be, and was more depressing certainly than the other speakers, but I hope it sets a framework. Thanks.
Not at all, Mitch. It simply fell on you to bring us down to earth a little bit with some realities about money, I suppose. But, you know, I think that the purpose of this discussion, and you certainly spoke to this towards the end, is that, you know, even in the context of an absence of money, when we're looking at ways to improve the situation, it's always going to be about more than just money and law. And it's also about solidarity and coming together and having a single voice, at least in certain localities and certain areas. Lots of questions in the chat. I'm just going to, I think, sort of ask them broadly speaking in the order that they've been asked, because they are on lots of different topics and raise lots of different questions. And hopefully, as you get the answers, you will be listening and thinking of other questions you want to ask, and we'll generate a conversation that way. As I hope most of you understand, we've got a very high number of participants, and so it's not really feasible to ask people to ask their questions themselves or to put their hands up or anything of that nature. That would give our brilliant administrator, Ray, a too tough a job. So you're going to have to put up with me asking the questions, but I'll try to do that as quickly as I can. So the first one, Neil, is a question for you, and it comes from Win Visible, and it's effectively really about this question. On the one hand, to perhaps as a building block to the kind of future that you were talking about and what that might involve, and particularly the sort of words you're using around love and place and family, there may be an inference there that implies reliance on family to be carers, etc. And so the question really is that Neil, unwaged family carers are demanding key worker status, a living wage or a care income. Many older and disabled people want trusted relatives and friends to look after us, not uncaring professionals, but want family carers to be properly waged and supported. And I just wondered if you've got any comments about that, or how we might realistically go about tackling that issue about whether or not care ought to be professional, needs to be professional, and if it isn't professional, then how do we make sure it's properly remunerative and is therefore sustainable?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I mean, I think just to clarify, from the point of view of the vision statement we've created, it's really about a vision of living one's life as everybody would expect to be able to live one's life. So a key function of the support that people are able to access is that they're able to both establish relationships, as everybody else might, maintain relationships. You know, just to flip the question that's been asked, it's my strong view, and I've seen this personally in my own family's experience, that we rely far so heavily on informal support to the point that we really do crush people, and that it's not sustainable. And I kind of worry about some of the narratives that are very much about celebrating carers, which obviously importantly recognise what people are doing, but sort of celebrating them, kind of heroising them, creating a situation where people can't actually put their hand up and say, well, actually, I'd rather not be in this situation. I'd rather be back in the situation I was as a husband or a wife or a brother or a sister. You know, that's the relationship I want. So I think it's a complex question. I think on the other hand, you know, if people have been assessed as eligible for social care and they have a direct payment, as far as I'm concerned, as long as there are, you know, no safeguarding issues, for example, if somebody wanted to use that to employ a family member, I see no reason why they shouldn't be able to. That's probably a different question from this one, which is about how do you recognise and financially reward the much larger group of people who are involved in one way or another with informal support. And clearly there are debates about that. What's the right balance between investing more in social care so more people have the choice as to whether or not to provide that support, and giving people some social security benefits to recognise that the support that they do. Sometimes think we don't trade those two things off, and I'd like to see that debate brought together. It's quite odd. We have a debate about carers and we often don't talk about social care as a public service. We never talk about childcare outside of a kind of the context of what childcare is there for, and how it both supports the well-being of children and liberates people to be able to work, particularly sort of women. So I think we need to connect these debates together better than we have been doing. And I think we need to weigh up these questions about whether or not it's better to invest more in public service support or social security benefits, or what the balance should be.
I suppose it goes to this question of choice, doesn't it? I mean, if there's going to be a real choice between a professional carer and a family carer, then it has to be one where it's on a level playing field, and you have to have the ability to actually ensure that your relative or whomever else it is that's going to perform that role can do it without being crushed in the way that you've described, but at the same time without drawing too much, I suppose, administration and etc. into that relationship.
Into that relationship, yeah. I think one of the things that's often not talked about is the way the current approach we have kind of subverts relationships, whether that's formal social care and suddenly relationships are policed and governed and monitored and become inside a system, or whether it's this over-reliance on relationships. In Sweden, there's this ethic called authentic love, on which their welfare state is built, really. And it's the idea that people shouldn't be in authentic relationships that are built of dependency. And it's about the autonomy of the individual and the choice of the individual to be in those relationships. And I think those ideas are sometimes missing from our discussion.
Yeah, and I suppose that also speaks to something that certainly in my experience I've seen, which is that the relationship between the informal carers and the council becomes the centre of the problem. And that always seems so sad and unfortunate and unnecessary. But I think there are a number of issues that would need to be looked at before we would manage to understand that and unpick it and hope it wasn't happening, because it's a sort of tragedy of a not a system in crisis. I understand the dangers of using that language, but certainly an aspect of the system that's not working as well as it might be. Great, thank you. So just moving on.
Oh no, carry on.
No, go on, Mitch, by all means.
No, I was just going to say two very quick points. One is, of course, no one should ever be forced to be providing this support, and that actually came in with the 1948 National Assistance Act, which got rid of the last elements of the poor laws, which put those sorts of duties on people. But I think there are lots of I think one issue that, looking to the future, which could be explored, is the idea that people who provide support for family members and take that view, often the work is incredibly unrewarded, when in fact they're saving the state a hell of a lot of money. And really, I wonder if we should really be looking to provide people who provide that support with pensions, so that they actually we in some way recognise, or some way to recognise the support that they provide, given what they're giving to their family member and what they're saving the state. Anyway, I thought I'd just throw that out there.
Interesting. I mean, I suppose that sometimes that is missed, isn't it? That actually it should be, the starting premise should be that the money that's being saved by about allowing carers to be involved, but without losing sight of some of the points raised by the questioner. Just so a bit more on the question of what sort of changes might assist. And there's a question in particular from Anant Rangan, Julie, about your suggestion about an ACAS-like body to conduct mediation, and Anant asked, do you foresee sufficient political will to fund such a scheme given the pre-COVID neglect of social care? Anant says that I would think the chances are even lower now, sadly, I might add. And there's another question which is related to that, which is, do you think, from Rachel, do you think that if the part of the Care Act which proposed to introduce an appeal system to a tribunal was brought into force, this would have a positive impact? So there are two kind of new institutions or bodies that could be created potentially to save money in the long run, or at least to improve the system. I just wondered, starting with Julie, what you thought about those two comments and questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty is, I suppose the gap we're trying to fill is there's no authorisation over commissioning, there's no regulation body over that. So if your issue is with a provider, there's CQC. If your issues with children, there's Ofsted. There's nobody who sort of regulates or has any accountability for council commissioning. So there's something, because I think somebody else had said, well, really, we just need to locally empower people. And, Mitch was saying that about local groups to empower people. But what we found is that some of the local groups are decreasing because of the austerity and the budget cuts. So a lot of the user-led organisations or powerful advocacy groups just aren't getting any funding anymore. And there's something more than advocacy that's needed. So it's something about sort of having the authority, a national authority. So yeah, I think an appeals process in some respects would work in a similar vein, really. It's just somebody to hold account. And what I class it on is keeping an eye on, you know, what different councils are doing. Sometimes the biggest difference it can make is if a family copies me in and then they know that somebody's got a national eye on it, or they've got a separate eye to the actual local area. And sometimes that can just make a big difference and things change.
Yeah. Mitch, do you have any views about the prospect of some sort of mediation service or the appeal system, or indeed both?
Whether it's through a designated appeal system structure or a mediation service. So one thing I would fully endorse is what Julie was highlighting in her talk about the importance of not advocacy, but advice and support, knowing how to finding a way to deal with a problem. Because one of the difficulties we have is that as a lawyer, I fully appreciate there are some situations where actually me being involved as a lawyer and writing to their legal department is absolutely not all that's going to do is entrench divisions. And I think what Julie was highlighting about a communicative way of or a means of communication in which to deal with problems before they escalate or become entrenched is huge. And I think it could resolve so many problems. So I'm very much in favour of another system. Quite how that occurs, I'm not sure whether an appeal system will go into a legal issue too easily. But I think some sort of mediation system and some way of, and I've seen Julie do this, where her experience and she can deal with issues by just talking the language and getting people to recognise this is not a binary issue. You can resolve these problems with a bit of discussion. And I've seen Julie do it on several occasions, and it's fantastic because it saves a lot of costs and a lot of heartache and aggravation for people if we can get issues dealt with quickly and without resorting to law and legal threats.
Thanks very much. Morgan Griffith-David asked this question. The Care Act's wellbeing principle seems like a good goal in theory that takes account of many important factors for quality of life, everything from basic safety to the importance of social connection, for example, but often seems not to translate to quality care on the ground. Obviously, that's partly because the sector doesn't have enough funding to deliver that care, but what could we do to look again at the Care Act and make it more stringent? Neil, do you have any comments about that question?
Yeah, two thoughts. I mean, I'll leave it to Mitch on the kind of specific legal questions, but I think the first is it's important to remember that the wellbeing principles in the Care Act are firstly just that, principles. So there's a question about their enforceability, but in particular they pertain to an individual. So they're not generic duties. There's not this idea that social care is a means to an end, that it should improve the community's well-being as a whole. It's about the well-being of a particular individual at a particular time. And I think that is a huge gap. If we're thinking about the degree to which the Care Act implements the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, for example, there is nowhere in law any statutory duty of progressive realisation. And I think one of the things that we're thinking about within Social Care Future, in fact we published a blog about it recently, is that we need that ambition. It's kind of missing. We should be saying, actually we want to be in a position a decade from now where we have moved forward on improving people's well-being, using those principles as a framework, if we like, but actually measuring that progress over time and seeing social care as a means to those ends, rather than simply something for which some individuals, obviously a decreasing pot of individuals, are eligible. And then they have a set of principles that are, as has been outlined by Morgan, often missing in terms of people's experiences. So I think that's one factor. I think the other, and related to that, which is interesting for me at least, was when the Law Commission were looking at the legislation that became the Care Act, a number of organisations proposed that the right to independent living was codified in some way within the Care Act. And the Law Commission completely rejected it on the most spurious grounds. They said it was too biased, that it kind of created a bias towards community-based living, when of course the accent on there is on choice of control. But just seemed very confused about its status. And there's some kind of reference to it in the end in the statutory guidance, but they said it was too vague, an idea to include there. I think we need to revisit that, because I don't think our legal framework as it stands is anywhere near sufficient to implement Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And I think that could give both individual rights, stronger rights, notwithstanding the issues we've discussed tonight about enforcement and redress, but equally could create a kind of stronger duty of progressive realisation. And it's something that there's another group I've been involved with the last few years that Baroness Jane Campbell chairs, the Independent Living Strategy Group, had conversations with the Equality and Human Rights Commission about what form that legislation might take, because it was a recommendation of the UN CRPD committee after its examination of the UK in 2017. So that's something I would like to see us look at again. But generally speaking, I think it's this absence of any ambition, the idea that, you know, as I say with the Child Poverty Act or other things, or the Wellbeing Act, that we should be ultimately improving the overall stock of well-being over time, and social care should be measured against that, rather than simply these principles that pertain just to the lucky individuals that are eligible for support.
Yeah, there's something very interesting about that, because some advocates for rights-based approaches think that's exactly what the result will be, but some people are less keen, think rights are too individualised, and that consistent with that potential problem. Mitch, what do you think? Do you think a rights-based approach, do you think that would transform things?
Yeah, I look back to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, because that contained within it principles that underpin the convention, like the best interest of the child, the voice of the child, and little by little through domestic law, it has gained ground and developed often with judicial opposition, going all the way up to the Supreme Court. But it has found its voice, and I think it's. I entirely endorse what Neil said, but I think these issues of choice, control, participation, transparency, there are principles here that need to be recognised for more than just being words on a bit of paper, but how they are achieved. And I think that is a huge challenge. He's absolutely right that Article 19 was dodged effectively, when very frustratingly, and that was a big setback. I think one of the biggest criticisms I would have of the Care Act as it goes. But I do think, with a greater understanding of what it means to have choice and control, and that's why what Neil and Julie have been talking about is so important, because it fleshes this out to how it affects people on the ground, and it takes it away from people's sort of almost austere, sometimes legalistic thinking, which lacks the vision to see how this can work in practice.
Thanks, Mitch. Julie, I'm just going to turn to you, because one principle we haven't talked about so far is the prevention principle, of course, that was introduced in the Act. And some of the things you were saying and the approach that your organisation takes made me think about the prevention principle, and trying to think a bit more sort of long term, and trying to keep families sort of within the system and not slipping into a kind of adversarial relationship. Have you found the prevention principle of any use in any of your kind of informal discussions and negotiations with the Council on behalf of families?
No, not really.
Okay, straightforward enough.
I would go back though to the wellbeing principle question, and said that actually the majority where the wellbeing principle has been used really, really well has been less about money and much more about the level of flexibility and control somebody can have over their life. You know, so yes, I've raised the prevention principle, and I've raised it in a, do you want to spend this much money now going to court and spend this much time? So I've done it on a more practical level, really, saying to local authorities, do you want to spend your time in a legal dispute with this family, or do you want to spend time getting this person the life that they want, but not in a legal sense, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing I think is interesting about the wellbeing principle is, just in my experience, it's the one thing that people know about the Act. You know, it's the one thing that people can latch onto and relate to about the Act, which I think is a good thing. You know, they do know, a lot of people understand that the wellbeing principle has something to do with the Care Act, even if we're still a bit unclear about what it means in legal terms. So it's helped to sort of popularise it to some extent. Okay, there are some questions, you know, quite a lot of questions about strategic litigation. And I can't read out all of them. I'm just going to read one that's particularly well put together, it seems to me, by Hannah, which is actually in the chat function, so a lot of people may have seen it. Thank you for a great seminar, she starts with. Perhaps that's what seduced me into reading out her question. Sorry, Hannah. I wonder if any of the panelists are able to comment on the value of strategic litigation during the pandemic to challenge some aspects of the coronavirus legislation, such as the all tiers regulations, and the sometimes hugely negative impact the regulations can have on the Care Act, which is presumably a reference to the Easements, Human Rights Act and the Equality Act. How can we ensure effective strategic litigation during this health crisis? Now, I'm conscious that a discussion about strategic litigation could take the rest of the session, so I don't want to invite that, because I know there's lots that could be said about it. But I wondered if we could just have a few words, perhaps starting with you, Mitch, about how you feel litigation has been or has not been useful, in particular in the context of the pandemic, because it's all happening so fast, and the law is coming out almost as fast as the virus is spreading. And you know, how useful is litigation really in a context like that?
I think it certainly has a role to play, and I highlight that when the Coronavirus Act came into force in March, I think, 2020. One of the things that it's, with respect to social care, adult social care, one of the things it did was say to councils, if you are under pressure, you can effectively tear up the Care Act. You just do what you want. It was an astonishingly draconian piece of legislation, and within a few days there were, I think there are 6 or 8 councils who had said, oh, we're going to have some of that, and signed up to it without any of the checks in the guidance. But what did happen was organisations and lawyers got very agitated, and we found cases were found, and letters before action were written, and all of a sudden councils were put on the spot, to the point now that no one actually took advantage of that ripping up of the Care Act. So that sort of strategic legislation, or strategic litigation, I should say, where I think organisations and lawyers and people worked very well together to nip something potentially quite dangerous in the bud, was very helpful.
Yeah, and I just wondered, I mean, you and I know others have been looking at some policies that have emerged in this area. So as we've seen sort of cuts, even if particular councils haven't adopted easements, we've seen things like sort of de facto bans on recreational services, or care plans which provide for things beyond life and limb, for example, Neil. And you know, we've looked at a few challenges even in that area, and even in that context it can be quite difficult, because often these policies aren't actually explicit, they're implicit, or they're being managed through rather than being actually decided as a part of a council's approach. I mean, I just wondered, you know, in that kind of context, when you see something happening time and time again, albeit in the context of individual assessments and decision making, does that sometimes still give you ground for strategic litigation, do you think? I was asking Mitch, but
sorry. Yes, I'd say it does. I think that one of the things the pandemic has hidden to a certain extent is the fact that councils up and down the country were perversely, have not provided support for people to access the community. They have not, even though it's part of the eligibility criteria, it has been avoided. It's one of the ways that councils have cut services and support, and the pandemic has hidden that to a certain extent. I think it's very important when we, because obviously people are staying home, and so there's not so much, people are not resorting so much to outside activities. Two things to say is that problem is going to come roaring back at us when lockdown finishes. And the second thing is that I wonder to what extent that people will, the experience that we're all having of being at home over these winter months, and people obviously feeling, for a short period of time, the relative claustrophobia of being indoors the whole time and being just in one particular environment, will now look at the fact that people are being asked, disabled people are being effectively forced into remaining at home for long periods of time, and start saying, actually, I didn't like it. This should not be happening. So I think the pandemic may have other impacts in that respect. But the problems, so many of the problems we have are so much more deep rooted than the pandemic. What the pandemic has done is just highlight some of them, and I just mentioned one that it's probably downplayed more than anything.
Yeah.
Neil, Julie, do you want to say anything about strategic litigation?
Yeah, I mean, I think in what Mitch was just saying now, Social Care Future are really keen about getting that message across that a lot of people who are disabled are in permanent lockdown. So I definitely think that's something to pick up post the pandemic. But there were other things that had sort of come in even just slightly pre-COVID. So one was there was a massive issue about everybody being thrown onto a prepayment card that controlled how you spent your money. And there was a group of people, including solicitors, who all got together and we sent out masses of freedom of information requests to every council. So there was something about nationally putting pressure on to say, no, you can't do that without giving people an option. And we've done that on prepayment cards, we've done it on charging. So there is something about nationally and strategically pulling together some of those experiences to put pressure on. I'd not necessarily litigate, although some have litigated through it, but even that national pressure of just making people aware that that's in breach of the law.
Yeah, it's sometimes useful to coalesce around rights, isn't it? It's almost like if you have rights or potential litigation, it does draw in people who are concerned about the issue, and you can generate action about it. I mean, Claire from Win Visible was asked a question in relation to mediation, but I think the point holds good generally. She says, remediation, we need some power behind us to be taken seriously, which is why people seek legal advice. People complain individually and we are ignored. And it does seem to me that Claire's onto something there, and it's particularly relevant to this context because some of these decisions feel so personal and so individual. It's hard to try and extrapolate from that what the broader issues are that we can then litigate, which is why we always end up focusing on the money.
Can I say something about that, Jamie? Because I think this is where the narrative work that we're trying to do, what we know of people's experiences and where litigation could make a big difference, and links back to COVID. So I think I saw a report the other day which was about what was happening to people's care packages now, and there was some evidence that where care packages concerned personal care at home, many of them had been largely restored. But what hadn't been restored, and it's already outlined, are things like day services, social activities. Now, one could attribute that to the fact that they, at the minute, can't be open. We've got to be careful about how we characterise them. It may not mean that the money isn't there. I've heard people say they're still getting direct payments in the bank. They just can't, but councils aren't letting them spend it or anything else. That's part of the problem. But they're still kind of stocking up. But the services and the supports aren't there. But in addition to this idea that Julie just outlined about the fact that for many people, the kind of shift into lockdown last March had implications, but didn't radically change their ability to kind of live their lives freely and to go out and to be part of the community. that for me, this is where I think strategic litigation could really help underpin the narrative that we're trying to create. Not at the expense of kind of the day-to-day personal care and support that people might need, but for the fact that people are not being supported to realise the ambitions of the Care Act at all in any significant way. And in fact, what's interesting about the kind of narrative at the minute about funding, which is there, that narrative is about not having to sell your home to pay for care, or it's about personal care. We're not even debating how to fund implementation of the Care Act and those wellbeing principles that are there. So I think if we could at least orientate some strategic litigation towards these questions of whether or not people have the support to be part of their community, where you can see the distillation of the wellbeing principles, Article 19 of the CRPD, the Equality Act, a whole range of opportunities there. I think that could be a real powerful driver of the where we want to go, even if in the short term what it's doing is further revealing the deep structural fault lines that Mitch has talked about. I think could be a powerful way of telling that story of what a lot of people are enduring. And and that's for people living in the community. If we think about the situation of people living in residential care homes for whom the risk of COVID has been so great, but the measures that have been taken to protect people from COVID and how limiting they are of people's human rights just to see their families has just been absolutely enormous. So I think there's another question is, when we come out of this, how can the law help us to return to some semblance of normality? So if people's packages have been shut down, or if they've not been able to engage in social activities, how quickly can that be restored, and what will be the role of law there, rather than those things being lost forever? Equally, the whole question post-vaccination of whether or not families can be with one another again in care homes is another area where I think the law may have to play its hand.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, speaking for myself, that rings really true. I mean, even before COVID, though, we were seeing really serious cuts to the types of activities we were talking about, which come under the sort of generic heading of access to the community, but whether it's cuts to transport or cuts to day centres, which acted as a hub for access to the community, etc.
Yeah.
Some of the time it was dressed in the rhetoric that we've talked about. We were moving away from building-based services, we're moving towards something which is more about personal independence and choice and allowing people to access mainstream services. But then when it came to that critical question of supporting people to do that, there just was nothing there.
Yeah.
And that's why it became a false narrative. It became about actually hiding a cut rather than actually implementing the principles of the Care Act as you describe. And I think that is the classic area where strategic litigation ought to be available. That segues quite neatly into what the sort of next raft of questions were about, which were sort of directed at you, Neil, but I think all of you will perhaps have something to say about it, which is, how do we translate some of these broader ideas around the narratives, for example, into something tangible that brings about change? Like, who is the audience, for example, for Social Care Future? For the purpose of what are you changing these narratives, and how will that result in a fundamental shift? And how do we generate the sort of public support, if that isn't answered in the same answer, to allow that to happen? And Neil, we'll start with you, but I'd be very interested in what Julie and Mitch have to say about that too.
Sure. I think the answer to that is there isn't one answer. It's multi-pronged, and everything we're talking about is relevant to achieving those goals, whether it's use of the law, whether it's communications, whether it's movement building, whether it's advocacy, whatever it might be. So I don't think there's kind of a silver bullet. It's all of the above. I think, though, very much at the heart of our theory of change, if you like, is that we do need to shift public thinking, understanding and salience around social care if we're to get anywhere near the vision that we aspire to. And we've been carrying out work on that for the last 18 months, researching how social care had been largely communicated by campaigners or talked about in the media or by politicians, how the public thought about it, and identified, as I said at the very beginning, a big gap between where that was and what our vision is. So we've just completed research to look at how we could most persuasively communicate our own story and build support for it. And the results are really promising. We're going to be publishing them in the next few weeks. Of course, having that research is one thing, getting people to sort of take it and use it and communicate it en masse to so sort of segment of the public that in communications terms are sometimes called a persuadable audience, who tend to not be strongly politically affiliated or have trenchant views about issues. It kind of means that they can be reached and their thinking can be influenced. So that's our target public audience. But we'll need to work with our own network and others to sort of build that communications capacity and that reach to be able to hit that audience. But we're also, as I also mentioned at the outset, we were approached last year by a new group of come together called an Impact Accelerator. I'm not sure that will be their formal name when they launch. And you may have come across them, Jamie, because they've been working with the Grenfell families. And it's people with expertise in digital campaigning, other forms of campaigning in government and elsewhere, who are offering us free advice on to how we could turn what we're doing into a campaign and build a movement. And again, I think what we need to do is move away from a movement that at the minute is probably largely comprised of people who are very much in a kind of in-group, if you like, people who have direct experience of social care or who work in it or whatever else, into a much bigger, public, broader-based movement for change. That's what we're exploring. That's what our ambition is to try and do. So those are the two things that we think could make the change. We do need to change the story, but we also need a kind of broad movement behind that story of change as well.
Fascinating. Well, I'm sure everybody will be looking out for that report in a couple of weeks, and then seeing what the Impact Accelerator can produce in due course. And you kind of see how a few kind of main catchphrases or a few subtle shifts in the way we talk about this could actually have profound impact. I mean, I think that's something that's easy to comprehend. And you just look at something like free school meals, for example, which, although it's happened through various sort of clumsy policy decisions, it's been a masterful exercise in campaigning in some respects. And now we're having broad discussions about food security in the UK that haven't been able to get off the floor for a very long time. It's been fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
Julie, do you have any comments about this?
Yeah, I think we've got a few windows of opportunity, really, just from what's come out publicly anyway. So, BBC Breakfast have been doing a great amount of what's happening in the community. And I think this is probably the first time that I've heard generally public people start talking seriously about whether or not I want my mother to go into a care home or not, or whether a care home is a safe place. So there's the whole remit of, we've already had masses of Murray reports saying most people wouldn't want to go into a care home, but most people are saying, well, it's inevitable that I'll have to do so, that I won't be a burden, but now people are much more thinking, well, what are the alternatives? So I think we've got some real opportunities here to say, actually, there are alternatives to institutional care. So I think that's one opportunity. And I think the other one is the mutual aid movements that's happened across the country. So I'm in touch with quite a lot of the organisers that set up a lot of the mutual aids at the beginning of the pandemic, helping people with food supplies and prescriptions. And they're suddenly now getting their eyes opened at how little or how difficult it is to get the right social care support. And it's members of the public that perhaps had never quite engaged in that way before, until they'd started reconnecting with the neighbours and who might need support. So I think there's a couple of little windows of opportunities, really, where we could really try and generate much more public support on a national level.
So when your eyes are open, that's when you're, I was about to say impressionable, but that gives the wrong impression. But you're open-minded about new ways of looking at things. I see that. Mitch?
I totally agree. And I think the scope is there within the Care Act to do that. I mean, Julie talked, when she was giving her talk at the start, talked about the importance of flexibility with direct payments. Too often people are dictated to by, this is what you can use your direct payments for, and this is how, there is no flexibility in what they're being told. It's all out the window. And it comes, I think, with this silo thinking of, if we allow people to tell us what they want, they'll start saying, oh, it's going to cost a hell of a lot more money. Well, actually, I think that is unproven, because it's not been tested. And the more people get to talk about these issues, and the more it goes back to this understanding and ethos behind not just what disability is, but the community, what it is as a community issue. The more we have that debate, the more I hope the barriers will come down.
Well, Mitch, a fascinating answer, but I'm going to put that to the test. We're getting to an end, but I'm going to invite all of you to give us one wish. It's a bit of a cliche in this type of seminar, but I think it's worth asking. It's always interesting. one wish of something that you could wake up tomorrow morning and find has changed. And it doesn't have to be realistic, but it doesn't have to be hopelessly, rather it not hopelessly unrealistic. Like, what is an actual conceivable, feasible change that could be made tomorrow that you think would have impact? And if you had to pick one, what would it be? And just while you're all thinking about that, and I'm going to start with you, Mitch, I just want to say a few things about the Community Care and Health team, just to let you know that this is our first seminar of the year, but we have a couple of other really interesting seminars coming up soon, both on migrant rights and indeed a seminar we hope to have on sort of more of the kind of precise legal aspects of the Care Act, and just to kind of catch up on where we are with the Care Act, and a number of other really interesting seminars around commissioning mental health services and others. So please do look out for those in the future. I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. It's been a really good discussion. I know it's interrupted all your haggis and neeps and tatties. So it's been a particular sacrifice, but I hope you find it's worth it. And it's been a real privilege to chair this session and have such wonderful contributions from our three speakers, Julie, Neil and Mitch. So I'm going to invite them to give you, in a couple of sentences, their wishes for tomorrow morning. Mitch, what would you like to wake up and see tomorrow morning?
I suppose at the more unrealistic end of the scale, I would say a greater recognition of economic and social rights and how it impacts on inequalities within the community. Possibly more realistic, or hopefully more realistic, is more integrated health and social care, which actually goes into the depth of what integration means, rather than the superficial looks that we've had so far.
Time and time again, absolutely. Julie, what would your wish be to wake up tomorrow morning and read in the papers what's happened?
So mine would be that everybody had the right to independent living for people who need support due to being disabled or having long-term health conditions, that they would just have a right to live independently.
Yeah, and why shouldn't that be realistic? Absolutely. Neil, final words, what's your wish?
Well, I agree with both of those, obviously, but I'm going to go for something a bit more boring and practical and prosaic. But my dad had Alzheimer's. He sadly died last year. But one of the things that was most powerful for my mum and dad was the facilitation of a community circle, just bringing together friends, neighbours, connections, and amongst them agreeing about how they could support one another. But that's not self-executing. And I would just, if you were just to put a few million quid into supporting people around the country to become facilitators of community circles, it could be incredibly transformative. So that would be my practical suggestion.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Mitch, Neil and Julie, for giving us your thoughts. They've been inspiring and very thought-provoking. There's obviously a lot of work still to do in this area, but it looks like we're in a good place to start it. Thank you very much, everybody. This seminar will be recorded and will be available for anybody who wants to catch up on any of these ideas. And needless to say, if you've got any specific questions, feel free to email me at Doughty Street Chambers. And thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.